Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. The Dark Lady. When I was about 9 or 10, my mother, my sister, and I lived in an older two-story brick house. We rented the bottom half, and an older lady lived upstairs. The older lady moved out after a while to live with her daughter, so my mother rented the top half of the house too, so that my sister and I could each have our own rooms. My sister got what was the living room area of the upstairs apartment. It had once been a bedroom, and I got the actual bedroom. It was really pretty with floral wallpaper and everything, very feminine. Across the room from the door there was another door, which led into a very smallish room with slanted ceilings. It was in the gable of the house and a very small window. Off of this little room was a very little door that entered into a part of the attic. I was pretty excited about the prospect of having my own room once again. We'd lived in many, many houses, and most of the time I had my own room. I was pretty used to it. I even moved my desk in the little room, which for some reason I named the nursery, even though I was older than that doll age, and there was little physical evidence of the room ever being used as such. It was always extremely cold in there, and after a month, I moved my desk back. I was also extremely uneasy about having that door open, and I would even prop things up against it because sometimes, even though it had a pretty good latch, it would open by itself in the middle of the night. Then, I specifically remember one night, I woke up and thought my mother was in the room. My bed was situated so the door to the nursery was at the foot of my bed. Standing in front of the door, at my feet, was an adult shape, but it was all shadows. I think that I covered my head and tried to go back to sleep. Another time, when I was sick, I woke up and the shape was back. I got the distinct impression that I had called out to my mom in my head, and the figure was answering the call. I sat up a little bit to see if it was shadows from the window or something, but the figure remained. Then I let out a bloody scream for my mom, and the figure rushed across the room to the door leading into the hall. It passed directly through the light coming off the street, and it was definitely a solid black or shrouded figure. I got the impression that it was a sad lady. I never told my mom because I didn't think that she would believe me. Then after a few months, my mom moved us back downstairs because she could no longer afford the rent for the upstairs. We moved again after another year. There were some other strange things about this house. There were definite hollow spots in the walls, and strange noises came from them sometimes. Also, the basement had several different rooms, including a coal room and this strange meat locker type room. I got the distinct impression of evil that came from that room. Also, once I thought I saw a big grinning face in the dark where that door was. The strange thing about this, which makes me think that it wasn't just a 9-year-old's active imagination. Okay, well, the face may have been, is that about 2 years ago, I was talking with my mom about ghosts and faces that you see out of the corner of your eye. I kept saying, "Haven't you ever done that? Thought you saw someone?" And she kept saying, "No, never." After I let the subject drop, she brought it up again. She said, "Actually, remember the brick house on Shano? Remember when you girls were sleeping in that upstairs part? I went up there one day when you were in school to pick up dirty towels, and I was standing by your closet, looking out the window when I got this funny feeling. Then I thought I saw a woman standing there looking at me, but when I turned my head, she was gone. It was over by that little cold room in the front of the house. Remember that room?" I had never told her about the incident, and while I was growing up, we had lived in about 15 different houses, so there was no reason for her to just pick that house at random. On the golf course. After my senior prom, my buddies and I dropped off our small town Tennessee dates and headed to another friend's house to unwind. The prom had been tough on all of us. We never chose the right dates, and we were watching MTV on the couch. This was 1983. After severe 2 a.m. boredom set in, one of my friends and I decided to go for a walk on the golf course behind the house and see if anyone else was up at this hour. We walked a short distance, really just from one fairway to the next, and looked with interest at this giant old tree next to the creek at the bottom of the hill. It was a dark, clear night, and my buddy Mike and I could make out something under the tree. I asked Mike what it looked like to him, and he agreed with me that it looked like 2 people, and one of them was digging. I thought it was someone up to no good, and the last thing I wanted to do on prom night was get busted by the cops, so I said we should leave. At this point, Mike and I were about 300 yards away from the shadowy figures. We turned around and took about 2 steps before I looked back again. In that 1 second, the figures had gained about 1/3 of the distance between us and were closing in fast. Mike and I both screamed profanities and hightailed it for the house. I shouted, "Don't look back!" because the people in the movies that get killed are the ones who look back. But I forgot to remind him of the little knee-high chain that keeps the golf carts from leaving the cart path. As he sprawled on the damp grass, I jumped blindly, hoping I would miss the near-invisible chain. I made it, and helped him up without looking back, and we made it safely inside. Imagine you were our 3rd friend. Of course, you would have to go and see it for yourself. So, after a tall glass of water, we weren't into drinking beer yet, we took Kurt outside. After a short briefing, we went to the top of the same hill and let him go down to the scary part. After a few seconds, we heard that same 4-letter word, and here came Kurt, hustling up the hill. I was a little surprised that he was running so fast. He was a lot less chicken than we were, but there was no way anyone was going to beat me back to the house. In retrospect, we should have done some scientific tests or taken some pictures, but we were genuinely tired and creeped out. Mostly tired, since we had been dancing all night to Rick Springfield cover tunes. So we went back to Kurt's house and crashed. This story was mostly told as a funny icebreaker at boring parties later on, and we never thought much about it as the years passed. As a closing note, years later, when my folks finally joined that country club and I played golf there, I saw the 2 headstones of the farmer and his wife, who used to own the land a long time ago, that are buried near the 6th tee about 300 yards from where we saw those shadowy figures. The German house. When I was a very young child, my parents rented an old German house. What makes renting this house strange is that German families rarely rent out an entire house, especially to American servicemen and their families. The house is in 3 levels: the 1st floor, 2nd floor, and the attic. The house was full of antique furniture. The service couple before us had moved out when their 6-month-old baby had died of crib death. So we arrived, my stepfather, my mother, and me, and I was 4 years old. The people that moved in upstairs were very low-class people. The wife's name was Pinky. There were 2 boys and the father, whose name and face I cannot remember. One day, Pinky and my mother, bored in the German countryside and still no furniture to unpack, decided to explore the attic and its treasures. In a very old dresser, my mother found one drawer filled with family photographs going all the way back to the turn of the century. Her and Pinky felt amazed at the certainly important heirlooms left in the house by its owners, the Jans family. In the next drawer, my mother found many crucifixes in many shapes and sizes. They were gorgeous works of art. My mother said they came in many sizes and in different types of wood. The strange thing about them was that they had death sheets at the bottom of Jesus' feet. Death sheets are the sign of the SS. The next day, Pinky and my mother began looking to make a playground in the barn for us kids to play in. They found a well-like concrete hole in the middle of the barn. Inscribed in the concrete were the words Rommel 1943 and a swastika. What made this strange and even more scary was that in the courtyard was inscribed that the house belonged originally to the Schatz family. My mother never allowed us to play in that concrete well. Soon after we all moved in, my mother and stepfather began hearing loud noises from upstairs, as if the furniture were being moved around. My mother thought that Pinky and her husband were trying to entertain us. With the noises, the crucifixes began appearing all over the house. You would open a drawer, and there would be. You open a closet door, and one would be hanging there. When my mother and Pinky were going to put them back, all the crucifixes would be moved to a different drawer. My memory, and only memory of this time, is when Pinky's sons tried to scare me by taking me up in the attic and throwing dead mice on me. I heard them screaming as if someone were beating them. When they ran down the stairs, I just had to see what scared them so. I saw a little girl sitting on one of the old cedar chests. She was very thin, with little hair and very large brown eyes, giggling. Ever since, she was my imaginary friend. But the winds of change came. Pinky's husband was arrested for molesting me in the attic, an event that I can no longer recall. The accusations were very ugly, and I am glad that I do not remember. But the German police would not let him be tried by an American system and arrested him under German law. Pinky and her sons were moved out that day in fear for life move, for she was the one that turned him in. My parents and myself were being moved 2 days later in fear of life move as well. It was those 2 days when my mother knew that Pinky wasn't the one moving the furniture in the attic and wasn't telling ghost stories to amuse us, but was telling the truth. It all happened so fast that our furniture had arrived, yes, but we never opened a box. When we finally got to our new home and opened the last moving box, at the very bottom of the box was one of the most beautiful of the crosses, except for the out-of-place death's head. My stepfather took it and threw it away in a field 2 hours' drive away. What about the Jones family? They were such nice people, my mother said. She didn't want to ask about the antiques and family heirlooms. She figured it was a family member that they did not want to mention. What about the crosses? My mother found out that the crosses were strange, but the death's head was a sign of the SS. My mother also found out that there was a fairly unknown concentration camp nearby. Is it possible that the house was commandeered by an SS officer from a Jewish family? What about the children? Of the 4 children living in the house in 3 months, 1 died, 1 was raped, and 2 were subject to the harsh discipline of a father that seemed to change in that house. What about the giggling girl? She stayed with me, I remember, until I received a fractured skull from a wild horse. On the way to the hospital, I remember she said she had to leave me. I cried more from her saying goodbye than I did the 240 stitches I received. But if the horse had kicked me an inch lower, it would have broken my neck. An inch higher, I would have been blind for life. Was she my good luck charm? Was she a daughter in the Jans family, long dead? Who knows? Haunted house. Hi, my name is Bob. I was born in and grew up in a haunted house. My parents bought a quite large semi-detached house not long before I was born. It was on the market for a very reasonable price, which was down to the property being in a very dilapidated state, having been abandoned for some time. The fact that a good quality house had been left to decay in a growing suburban area of Merseyside in the middle of a middle-class street is in itself odd. But the house soon became habitable with a lot of hard work, though with little assistance from contract labor, deliverymen, or even other family members. Some just plain refused to go near the place. Some turned up, made their excuses, and quickly left. Not one deliveryman would cross the threshold. and by all accounts the house did exude menace in its own suburban way. I should explain that the house was fully furnished. Nothing had been looted or even thrown out about. All was as it had been originally. The roof and windows were shot, and the rains and weather came in so the furniture had been soaked through. Quality furniture abandoned with a house now decayed beyond redemption. My parents, as they worked in the house, often found the air turn chill and the hairs on their heads raised for no explainable reason. Many items, screwdrivers, pliers, etc., seemingly vanished without a trace. I think they were mad to have stayed, but they did. The furniture had to go, broken up and burned mostly, though some of the items were quite grand. I'm told they were, but all were beyond repair. One large chest of drawers, which had seized solidly shut, defied all attempts at being opened and had to be dismantled with a hammer and a crowbar. The drawers, when smashed apart, contained all of the missing items lost since my parents first took possession, including a still wet and warm window cloth my mother had lost just moments before my father destroyed the chest. Some time later, when the house was habitable, I arrived, delivered in the front bedroom. Nothing too remarkable about that, but with my birth returned the ghost. My room was fitted with a baby alarm so that my parents could listen to me screaming. For a while after my birth, the renewed sounds of heavy footfalls were heard upstairs, and an odor of burning candles was often commented on by visitors, though my mom never used them back then. Also, the icy patches had come back, and now, with the baby Link in my nursery, my parents had a voice. A kind voice of an elderly lady, usually singing Rock of Ages. My father tells me it used to freeze him to the spot, but my mother would run up the stairs hoping to meet our ghost. She never did. The voice would go on as she reached the stairs, and then it would stop and everything would be as it was before. The voice came regularly, and my mother inquired with neighbors as a way of ruling out interference from neighbors' televisions and radios. No link could be found with them and the singing voice. I think my parents just got used to it as time went by. People got more relaxed about the house, and the feeling of dread about the place went away. The house looked nice, and visitors used to treat the stories of hauntings with great skepticism. My grandmother, my mom's mother, was the greatest skeptic of all, but I feel that her story of all that I've heard from the house remains the best. It was Christmas, I guess 1970 or 1971. I was still little more than a baby, and both of my grandmothers were staying over for the festive season. I must have been out of my old nursery room because I know it was supposed to be moved back to the nursery to make room for the two old ladies. I also know I wouldn't go. I was adamant that the box room belonged to the lady. Not for anything would my 3-year-old self sleep in there. My mother's mom ended up taking the room in my stead, laughing at my parents' foolishness for believing all this haunting rubbish. Anyway, I don't know how many nights she had stayed, but on one of the Christmas nights, my grandmother had an interesting experience. It must have been fairly late, and my grandmother was getting undressed in the box bedroom when another old lady joined her in the room. The other lady looked at my grandmother and said, "Hello, Annie," which was my grandmother's name. "Love, I haven't seen you in ever such a long time." My grandmother fled. Can't say I blame her. It's a small room to be cooped up in with someone who you know is dead. It later transpired it had been the previous owner of the house, a woman my grandmother had known in the past, a woman who died under quite tragic circumstances in the house. I had a little sister the following year, and things got loud again. Footsteps and candles but no singing, just sounds. Clicks on the baby alarm. Nothing specific, just wrong. That was that. Things calmed down, or seemed to, I guess, because the noises just became normal, background noises to us, and we just stopped noticing them, though visitors still found them disquieting. We were feeling our ghosts must be getting used to us. As I grew up and entered junior school, I can only remember one incident that was even remotely unusual, and that was a glass vase which decided to move along a windowsill and then be flicked onto the floor, something I watched while having my breakfast before leaving for school one day. It was much later that I saw the lady, and I still hardly trust my own senses, but it felt as real as could be. I was a teenager. My room was in an attic conversion, reached by a wooden ladder staircase. On this night, I was in bed. It was fairly late, and I was awake, maybe only half awake, but aware. Anyway, I heard a sound. It was the sound of a shuffling feet on carpet. It was an unmistakable noise. I knew I was not alone in the room. To reach the room, you had to climb the bare wood stairs, which creaked and thumped however hard you tried to be quiet. I had not heard anyone climb them. Anyway, I summoned the courage to peep from under my bedclothes, and not expecting to see anything at all, but I was disappointed. In the gloom, I could see a woman in a dressing gown standing at the entrance to the room. She was old, and she was moving, though very slowly, into the room. Oddly, I was not too terrified, though I did not sleep that night after I popped back under the covers. I never mentioned it to anyone. I often wondered why I would see her in that room, as it could not be accessed in the house before. I did have a theory, well, two theories. The first was to do with an item of furniture. In my room was the only salvaged item of furniture from the old owner, the lower section of yet another chest of drawers. I wondered if that was what had attracted her to the room, but I also wondered if she was curious of the new room and just decided to explore. I guess I'll never know. About the same time that I saw the lady, my father saw her too. He never told anyone either. It was years later that he told me about it. Like me, he had been in a semi-doze, and he was lying on the sofa in the rear lounge, and he was facing what was, at the time, the door of a built-in cupboard. He says that he was just staring into space, relaxed and cozy, when a frizzled-haired old woman strode out of the cupboard doors and through the end of the sofa he was laying on. He said she was as clear and solid as any person, and he was able to give a fairly good description of her. He later visited our elderly neighbors, and he told them about the ghost he had seen, and he gave his description to them. They were surprised, to say the least. My father's description had been a perfect match of the previous owner. Anyway, time passed, and the noises had long since vanished. The candle odor was a memory, and the house was just a happy home, except for one spot. That spot was on the first landing, which is now the only place that won't get better. I wondered if it was just me. That is, until last year. I have my own house now, which I can only describe as 100% happy, and I never feel uneasy there. One evening, we had a group of friends over, and we all started on ghost stories, and a theme arose. Had I started it, I would dismiss it, but it wasn't me that mentioned it first, and I sat back amazed as agreement spread through the room. Of all the places that any of them had been going up, my mother's stairs was the worst. None could explain it further than a gut feeling that something they did not want to be any part of was hiding there. So people tend not to linger or look just in case. The first landing is a junction. From there the stairs go straight on and right and to the rear. There is something about that space. You have to check right. You don't want to, but it's almost a compulsion. Just one last thing. My little sister had a baby 6 years ago. Her and her boyfriend lived at my mother's at the time, and her bedroom was one of the two old hotspot haunted rooms. With a new baby, the footsteps sounded again, and something that never registered at first were the clicks on the baby alarm. We'd forgotten all about the ghost. The clicks, we began to realize, were at the same time every night. 10 minutes after 8, and again a little after 11. After the click, the baby would wake every time, and it wasn't until the family used a babysitter one evening that we paid any attention to the clicks as not being anything other than interference. It was my then girlfriend, now wife's 21st birthday. I arranged a big surprise party at a local restaurant. All the family would be there, so my sister got her boyfriend's mom to come over and look after my niece, Lizzie. Jenny, the sitter, knew very little about us. She had only met us a few times, and she had never heard a thing about our ghosts, that was for sure. Cutting a long story short, after a very pleasant evening, we returned to my mother's house to find Jenny by the front door. At just about a little after 11, she had heard a sound on the baby alarm. A click, and it was followed, she says, by a woman's voice who said, "Come on, Lizzie, love." Jenny was terrified when we got to her, the poor woman. But we have never heard a peep since, other than the clicks, which went on for more than a year afterwards. Well, that's all, I suppose. When I was about 22 or 23, my mom was telling me some things, and she mentioned a scandal involving the old lady who lived in the house, which involved her son leaving the country in a bit of a hurry. She hung herself soon after, and I think I know where.